Oh, hi, kids. I'm an unlicensed hologram of LeVar Burton. I didn't see you beam in because I had my sleep mask on.
Well, friends, we find ourselves together once again discussing Futurama, the second season of the Hulu Rama revival. This is Season 12, Episode 9, otherwise entitled The Futurama Mystery Liberry. Now, there will be spoilers ahead. If those are not for you, this is your last warning. Let's crack a book and on into the show. We have finally reached the mandatory season anthology episode, and even though it defies all expectations, never in my wildest nightmares, my wildest dreams, my wildest death throes have I ever assumed I would be praising an anthology episode in Futurama in this decade, heck, even in this millennium, I guess you could say, almost. Outside of the first couple of anthology episodes in Futurama, for the most part, they've all fallen flat for me, especially last episode. It felt more like a dumping ground for half-baked ideas that really had no creative input behind them. They felt mostly lifeless and going through the motions of, I guess we have to do an anthology episode again. This one, for whatever reason, felt so full of life and so rich and so full of jokes that it was almost like they were just waiting to be able to tell these stories. They were waiting to be able to find a place to implement these jokes, and they were quick hit. This episode here, we have three main stories, and then obviously the overarching framing device of everything with LeVar Burton,
unlicensed hologram of LeVar Burton.
All of these things really came together to feel like a cohesive episode that really didn't pull any punches and just were firing on all cylinders throughout the entire course of these plots. Now, that isn't to say I thought all of them were equally grand. For my part, probably the first two, the first one being a Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Tom Swift type storyline, that was probably pretty strong. And for the most part, I might have thought it was my favorite. However, on a second watch, I think the second story of Tintin probably was a little bit better and a little bit stronger and a bit more cohesive as far as the story goes. And then Encyclopedia Brown at the end, which ironically, LeVar Burton even makes a joke about.
All right, kids, I saved the best for last. Oh, wait, I read them out of order.
I felt that was the weakest of the stories and probably didn't quite have as much magic as the others. For the Tintin episode especially, it was incredibly stylized and done in another animation style, probably still using the same techniques and the same programs, but it was very much retooled and redrawn so that everything looked like it was taking place in a quasi-Tintin universe. For the first story and the last story, yes, a lot of the character models were redrawn to look like other people and other characters, but the style and the substance and all of that didn't really appreciably change. So the Hardy Boys story at the beginning was very interesting, and it led to a pattern throughout the rest of these stories that I actually thought was a very clever through line, I guess you could say. It wasn't just a quirky, weird mystery in the style of the show. They implemented a science-y or a science fiction-y element to be the grand cause of all of these things. So the first one, it turned out to be a black hole, and then the entire universe was sucked into itself, and then of course everybody died mostly at the end of that. The second story was about plate tectonics and time travel, whereas the final story, Wikipedia Brown, didn't have an actual real resolution. It was more of a, well, we can't solve this, and then Neil deGrasse Tyson came in to explain what matter is, and then run away at the end of the episode. I think that's sort of along the lines of something like, and I don't want to say this is on the same level as a Blazing Saddles or something like that, where they were unable to craft a satisfactory ending. So they just kind of threw everything at the wall and went so wacky and so out of left field that it felt like a more satisfying ending than it really was, even though things weren't wrapped up. I actually thought that was a good way to end a story, where had it ended like the other stories where it was some scientific phenomenon or science fiction-y phenomenon, it probably wouldn't have felt like a good note to end things on. So I actually am pretty glad they went the way that they did. Now, take a look at the members of this channel.
No thanks. I said look.
When all is said and done, this probably isn't going to wind up being the greatest episode Futurama has ever done, but it really does showcase the fact that a lot of these writers or the people behind the scenes truly do still have a passion for the show. They still do have creativity left in the tank. They really are trying to tell stories that aren't just to get a paycheck. They really have something that they're trying to tell, something they're trying to showcase, and something they want to creatively put on our screens. And I think that's something that wasn't really present in the first season of the Hulu revival pretty much at all. It felt like most of that was either leftover ideas, things they've been working on for a few years, kind of in the background, thrown at the screens. And at worst, in things like the Anthology episode of that season, it felt like it was just a mundane obligation that really didn't have any thought, effort, or creativity put into it. Not to say there was no redeeming benefit from it at all, but it just felt like their hearts weren't in it. And I have to say that season 12 so far, even though it got off to a pretty shaky start, it really does feel like they've hit their stride once again, and we can really look forward to some more fantastic Futurama episodes in the future, assuming we get several more seasons after this. For a while there, I was kind of hoping we wouldn't get more seasons because it was kind of floundering and almost like it was on life support. But here we are, revitalizing everything, telling some really unique stories in an anthology episode that also ties into some of the themes that they've discussed earlier on in the season. I mentioned last episode, and it kind of follows through here, there's been a heavy reliance in this season on things like, landfills that are of our own creation, things that are being thrown away, the destruction of the environment, all because of our narcissism and our belief that we're above everything. Things like that were still played on here, especially you have the book element with LeVar Burton throwing books in the fire, the reference that people don't read books, that they make a good movie in the future, that's the only reason they exist. All of these things are well-trodden elements and themes seen throughout this season specifically, so to have it all come back here in a fun, wacky, alternate dimension kind of way, even though we're not clear what LeVar Burton actually is in the universe, and I really like that. And they also brought in Neil deGrasse Tyson to kind of fill the role that Stephen Hawking did in very early seasons of Futurama. Granted, they're not necessarily the same thing, they're not a one-to-one comparison, but he feels like the same type of storyline they would have told with Stephen Hawking had he still been with us to fulfill that role. So yeah, while it's an incredible shock to my system to even be saying this episode of Futurama, this anthology episode of Futurama, might be the best thing I've seen in this show in quite a long time, and really does a fantastic job of parodying things that can't possibly still be in the collective consciousness the way that they would have been decades ago. I mean, the Hardy Boys, Tom Swift. I say that now realizing that places like the CW and Netflix have really done teen angsty updates of these things anyway, so I guess I kind of defeated my own point. However, they went back to the source material. They did a good job of recreating the feeling of things, especially like Tintin, as I said. If this is one episode of Futurama you're going to watch in the new era of the show, I think this probably so far does the best job of being a standalone or really fun watch. And I hope we get more of this in the future. What are your thoughts? Did you like this episode? Whatever you thought, leave all of it down below. Like, share, subscribe, join the channel, do all those things. And until next time.
And they all lived happily ever after. Except that guy who died.